Let's go ahead and get started. I'll introduce myself. I'm Hanna. I'm a data scientist with Farmers Fridge. It's a healthy vending machine company. I'm based out of Chicago. It's not quite as hot here, though it has been pretty hot over the weekend. Not 97, like 90 degrees, so hot for Chicago. And I'll be moderating the panel today. So we have 4 founders for you who will be speaking about their experiences creating a company based around a data product. And for the audience members, if at any point you have any questions for the panelists, feel free to drop it in the chat. I'll make sure to leave about 15 minutes or so near the end of the discussion to address any of those questions that are in the chat. But we're going to go ahead and get started. I do have some slides for introductions as we introduce our 4 panelists. So let me just share my screen. And then for the panelists, when you see your name pop up, just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your company, maybe 1 to 2 minutes. And then we'll jump into the discussion itself. So let me share this. Slides. Here it is. All right. Okay, great. So first up, we have Barry McCardle from Hex.
I have to go first. Hey everyone, I'm Barry. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Hex. I am based in very temperate and lovely San Francisco. It's one of those days when I remember why I live here. Hex is a data workspace for teams, as it says on here. The way to kind of think about what we do is we're building what we think is the best way for folks to connect to data, explore it, and be able to share the results of their work. And we'll get into more of this later. It's sort of the product I always wish I had. I know we have a few of our users on the Zoom today, so excited to talk to you about what we're up to.
Great, thanks, Barry. All right, next up, we've got Steph Olafster from Avo.
Thank you. Nice pronunciation. Yeah, Olafsdóttir would be the Icelandic way of saying it, but I won't ask anyone to do that. Yeah, I'm Steph, CEO and co-founder of Avo, which is the analytics governance platform that helps product managers, data scientists, and developers collaborate for faster and easier way to implement and verify and plan their analytics releases for every product update with better data quality. My backstory is I am a mathematician and a philosopher, and I've been in data science now for around 10 years, starting in genetics, actually, where I was correlating physical traits with DNA mutations and doing distributed computing and all sorts of stuff. Then I joined as the founding analyst for QuizUp, which is a mobile game with 100 million users, backed by Sequoia and Tencent. Someone is
yeah, can I ask anyone who's not on the panel to mute your microphones, please? Great, thank you. Sorry, Steph, go ahead.
No worries. Yeah, so I joined as a founding analyst for QuizUp, which is was a mobile game with 100 million users backed by Sequoia and Tencent. And there I became head of data science and growth lead and multiple other hats like you do at a startup. And we learned about and solved 3 key milestones, which are the driving function behind why we have Avo today. Number 1, how crucial it was to build a self-serve analytics culture to ensure decision-making wasn't bottlenecked by human throughput of data experts. And number 2, how crucial it was to build some sort of analytics governance, because otherwise decision-making was still bottlenecked by lack of data quality, data literacy, and data discoverability, really. And then number 3, how crucial it was to sort of expand that governance into more of like a self-serve function, because otherwise we were always blocking product releases by schema management. And we developed tools and processes internally to solve these things. And then fast forward a couple of years later, I started in a company, and it only took me 5 months to be in the same situation again, where we shipped a product update that was bad for the product based on incorrect data. And that sort of was a punch in my gut, and one of the reasons why we eventually went into building Avo, which is sort of the SaaS version of what we had internally solved at QuizUp. So I've been obsessing over this problem for 7 years now, 8 years maybe.
Great, thanks, Steph. All right, next we have Tejas Monohur from High Touch.
Hey everyone, I'm Tejas, one of the founders of High Touch. High Touch is a reverse ETL platform. So basically what we help companies do is move data from data warehouses like Snowflake into different SaaS tools that sales, marketing, and success teams rely on. These are things like Salesforce, Zendesk, Marketo, NetSuite, and a variety of other use cases like even say production DBs like Postgres for powering in-app personalization. Before founding High Touch, I was actually an early engineer at Segment. So that's where I was introduced and I got super fascinated by the data space. At Segment, I actually built a variety of scripts and Trade.io workflows to move data into Salesforce in ways that couldn't be satisfied by our own product at Segment. And I also noticed that a lot of the problems we are solving in the Personas product in Segment, which is one of Segment's leading drivers of revenue today, which I was on the early team for, would have actually been better solved on top of the data warehouse directly. So that's what motivated me and my co-founders to leave the company and ultimately start High Touch, which is now backed by even the founders of Segment who no longer work there, which is super exciting. So yeah, super excited to join the locally optimistic panel. I've been in the community for I think a year or a year and a half now, and that's probably not too long, but it's been a super great place for me to learn and really get into the space of data professionals. While previously at Segment, we were actually looking at the data space more from a product developer mindset more than a data professional mindset. And that's why the last year to two of learnings has been pretty tremendous on that side for me personally.
Great, thanks, Tejas. All right, and our final panelist is Nick Handel from Transform.
Hey everyone, I'm Nick. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Transform. We're building a metrics store, and the purpose of the product is to empower data analysts to define, manage, publish through a wide variety of APIs the metrics that they use in kind of all of the downstream tools that they want to consume metrics in. And this is inspired by some work that myself and my two co-founders did at Airbnb, mostly between kind of 2014 and 2017. And so kind of going into my background, I started off as a quant research analyst at BlackRock just before the data scientist title kind of took vogue. And that was a lot of fun, learned kind of how big enterprises work, and then decided that I wanted something a little bit more fast-paced. And so moved over to Airbnb in 2014, and kind of at a time when Airbnb was really shifting towards this data-driven culture, building a lot of interesting tooling around that time, and yeah, met a lot of great people, learned a lot. And then more recently, I was the head of data at a Series C startup called Branch International, and it's a micro lender. We did a lot of machine learning, a lot of analytics, built credit models, fraud models, all kinds of things to lend in Mexico, Nigeria, Kenya, India, a few other places. And kind of identified then that a lot of companies, I basically took a lot of the tooling that we had at Airbnb for granted, and learned a lot about what kinds of tooling was available, and decided to start Transform. I am in San Francisco, and it's very beautiful today. We're very lucky not to have fog. This is fog season. So yeah, very excited to be here.
Great, thank you all for introducing yourselves. I'm going to stop sharing, and we're just going to be straight up panel from now on. But I do want to start out the discussion. A lot of you guys touched on the frustrations that you had previously in your career as kind of the inciting event to launch your company. But if you could pick out any moment that maybe was the inspiration for when you decided, hey, I think we need X, what would that be? And then kind of a two-part question here, once you had your idea, what convinced you that there was enough of a market or enough demand to make it a viable business? Whoever wants to jump in.
I went first and last one, so I'll go for this one. So yeah, as I alluded to, and I think probably it's true for all of us, which probably says something about founding companies, is like Hex was very inspired by personal experience. I've had some flavor of the problem we're solving like basically my entire career. So I started my career as a consultant doing like deeply unholy things in Excel. Like I was like writing the most crazy nested functions you've seen and like, VBA, and I was like shipping new releases of my Excel models. And it's like 2011 and like that was kind of for me like the state of the art of how like data work was done. And then I went to Palantir, where I was there for 5 years. I got a lot more technical. I was like learned SQL, learned Python, worked on all sorts of different types of analytics products. And then I left there to go to a startup that I worked really closely with our data team. And I think similar to something Nick said is like I kind of took some of what we had for granted at the previous role in terms of like data infrastructure and the ability to like share work. And so I actually started this journey as a buyer. Like we had some data tools at my company, and I started by going out and looking for something that kind of fit my bill of like what I thought should exist. And I really had to kind of convince myself that it didn't exist. I kept thinking I was going to like turn up some rock and find like Hex, or what I hadn't yet thought of as Hex, like sitting there like surely this must exist. And like there was a lot of stuff, like the data space is crowded, there's a lot of stuff, and like people kept pointing me to like tools that I thought were pretty crummy, or like a lot of like open source stuff that if you cobble it together in just the right way and like want to maintain it, like maybe you could get some semblance of this. And so it wasn't until I like fully exhausted that well that I was like, okay, like no one's done what I think should exist here. And then the TAM question was actually really kind of scary, because I kept thinking like maybe I'm the only person who thinks this. And I got really paranoid and went all over. I lived in New York at the time. I remember just taking the subway. It was like two years ago, like around this time, like just taking the subway all over the place to different people that I knew in the data space, like just asking them like, hey, like, is this something like I kept hearing people like validate my idea, but kept not believing it. And it took a while for me to fully convince myself. But one thing I never did was like a top-down TAM analysis. I never like went and analyzed the market. And I think if there's folks on this panel that are like would ever think about, or that are listening now or later, think about starting their own company, like I think one thing about the data space that's great is it's so big that if you're onto something that like enough people have an issue with, like there is a market there. Now the problem is it's also very crowded. That's like the other side of that. We can talk about that more later. But like I think for me it was just getting to that point where I was like, okay, I'm not the only one with this problem. That was enough for me to think like it's worth starting to experiment with. I didn't push all my chips in for a little bit longer, but like that was enough to like kind of get me running once I had sort of convinced myself that I wasn't totally crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just complete echo on maybe I'm the only person who thinks this. That took me a really long time as well to get out of that. And I think I have a funny story about that as well. I'll get to it later, but regarding TAM as well, like I think it's really important to keep in mind that, when you're building a new product, and particularly if you're building like a new category or something, you can't use typical ways to calculate TAM, I think. And that's something that you really need to keep in mind. Like it's not like opening up a new restaurant or something like that. So it's like, yeah, so there are tricks to that. That said, of course, it's important to get an understanding of a potential outcome. But I think I covered like, what was the spark for me? I covered it a little bit. Like this was a super painful problem for me at QuizUp. And it was sort of serendipitous how I ended up, or how we ended up solving the problem there. Because I had a really close relationship with the CTO. To further that, he's my husband today. And so we came at this from two typically unrelated perspectives. So the CTO and the head of data science typically don't connect that much to each other, at least not in 2013. Like head of data science it wouldn't even be called head of data science. It would be called something completely different. And they would typically report to the CFO, which I did originally, at least. I was hired in by the CFO. But so our pillow talk would be like, you know, oh my God, I can't believe how crappy the data that I'm working with is and how difficult it is to sort of just know when the product team is releasing a new product so that we can maybe get in on the action and sort of help advise them on what analytics they should release with that. And from his perspective, like, oh my God, I can't believe how frustratingly, you know, inefficient it is to implement these analytics events, implement the tracking. So we sort of came at this from this unique perspective and were able to solve it internally at QuizUp. And I think that was unique. And I found out way later, this was like 2013, 14, I found out way later that, for example, Spotify built a solution like this in 2016. And when I found out about that, I was like, we were early. And I felt like, yeah, it sort of surprised me. But, you know, again, I just hated this problem a lot. And then when we instantly had this problem again at a company that I founded after QuizUp, I had to go home that day when we found the data bug, because I was like, I'm gonna probably not treat people well because I'm like, I'm so frustrated. And that sort of sparked me to start reaching out to everyone, just like you're describing, Barry. Like, but my perspective was really like, you know, there must be a better freaking way to solve this problem and do this. And I want to learn how other people are doing it and just do it like them. I wasn't coming at it from a perspective of like, let me go build a product and solution for it. And then my co-founders, they sort of pushed this forward very strongly, while I was more of like, I'm never going to touch the data space again. It's broken. And then when that support and drive came through, and when I started talking to people at Spotify, at Airbnb, who had long been my role model in the data science space, and various different companies, I just realized there's something there. And then we started just trying to get our first early customers, get someone to pay or commit to paying.
I can jump in here as well with a personal story. So I used to work at Segment, and I think my situation is a bit different since I actually came at the space not from being a data practitioner at a company and solving my own problem, but more seeing an opportunity in the market based on already working at a data company. From my perspective, actually, initially, when I started to work on High Touch, it was a pivot of our original business that we were working on when we left Segment. When I first started thinking about the opportunity, I almost thought it was too small because it felt like something that should just be a feature of a product like Segment, which was started to solve a very similar goal to a lot of the use cases we solve at High Touch today, which is really like helping different business teams use data around the organization. What I learned over time, and specifically why I saw it as a feature, is on the Personas product that I worked on at Segment, I actually built a feature called SQL Traits, which allows you to import data from a data warehouse into kind of Segment's model of what a user is. And when SQL Traits was launched, this was actually like a feature that we thought would be a very small thing for Segment's trajectory, that super large thing for Segment's trajectory. On the Persona side, people were using this feature left and right to do all sorts of crazy things with Segment, like move Stripe data into Google Analytics, or basically they would hack this feature in a bunch of different ways. And I started to notice that a lot of customers of Segment actually wanted a product built out of this feature, built for a completely dedicated purpose, more than they wanted the product they were buying Segment for themselves. And at first it just felt like something Segment would correct, but Segment's long-term vision and kind of their whole product strategy was to go and build something else. So I think there's something to be said of, a lot of times an opportunity, it looks like it's very small. It looks like it's a part of something another company's pursuing. But there's actually oftentimes like a really big opportunity just built out of a feature of an existing product seen through totally, and with a comprehensive platform built around it, which was my perspective in finding the startups. I think tons of times startup founders think that something's pretty small, and then they realize that it's actually pretty big when you look deeper and figure out the whole space around it.
Thanks, Tejas. Nick, do you want to finish
definitely.
this out?
Yeah, so I kind of break this up into 3 sections, and I think the beginning was right when I joined Airbnb. It was right before this metrics. It was called metrics repo at Airbnb, and it's right before it came into existence. There was basically like half of an engineer building it, and I was coming from this world of like VBA, SVN, MATLAB, Bloomberg APIs. Like R was cutting edge. It was just everything was new and exciting when I joined Airbnb. And so basically this tool comes out. I spent my first few weeks, and I just wrote a blog post about this like yesterday that I'm going to publish very soon. So I won't go into too much details, but I'll hint at it. Basically, like it was this, it was just like this moment of, wow, I'm like 100x more productive than I was like last week. And I think that was when kind of the concept started to like form, and I got excited about it. And I think, there's like a long way from concept to like a vision of what a product could be. And so I think that kind of just built over the years. I think it really formed when I left Airbnb and realized like, what are the tools that I can purchase? What are the tools that I could reasonably build with my with like the 2 engineers that I could work with at this Series C startup, and just dramatically different world than the world that I was in at Airbnb. And so I think that was when I started to realize, well, there's nothing quite like this out there, and I really miss this tool, and I can't quite build this, but now I'm using this entire other set of tools that it could integrate with, just like it integrated with a lot of the tools that I use at Airbnb. And so I think that was when kind of the vision started forming in my head of this like metrics tool could interact with so many other tools and just make it a lot easier to build these data sets. And then from there, on like validating the market, I think, once you have a product that you think should exist, then you kind of have to go out and understand, do other people feel the same pain points that I feel? And I started off with consulting, so I did like 6 months of consulting after I left Branch, trying to figure out like what I should build. Learned a ton. I think that's a great way to like go out and understand people's problems. Ultimately, consulting is just like coming into many different problems and trying to understand them and trying to think about what's out there and provide some kind of relatively immediate solution. And then from there kind of moved into just lots and lots of conversations. So I think we talked to 100 kind of people who we thought would be our potential customers, and just kind of tried to like tie all of the similarities between them. But you just need a really wide range. And then I think ultimately when like the moment when I was very convinced was probably by the time we put together a prototype and actually put it in front of people and just ask them how they'd interact with it. And I think that's when it becomes a lot more real, and you like really understand how this idea that kind of goes from a concept to a tool that could be broadly adopted could actually be used by like your end customer.
Great, thanks all. It sounds like you all have very different experiences at finding these ideas, so we appreciate you sharing your perspectives. Let's take the direction of finding your co-founders, because I think you all have co-founders that have joined you on building this business. So how did you reach out to these people? What sort of attributes were you looking for, skill set or mindset that would make a good co-founder or good early stage team member for a startup?
Wow. Good question. Anyone want to go?
We abide by the order, or just
It's a free for all. Whoever has the strongest opinion.
Yeah,
you jump
someone else go first on this one.
I can at least share. So I've worked with my co-founders previously. I think a good criteria to keep in mind is if you wouldn't want to spend a week with them, or maybe even a month somewhere in a like juicy cabin or a summer vacation, and you wouldn't have fun. I think that's important to have a relationship with your co-founders where you feel you can enjoy the ride with them. I think that is important. Another thing, yeah, I feel like a thing that really has helped our journey has been just building a trusting relationship, knowing that you can build a trust between the team and between the people that you're working with, because the founding journey is very filled with ridiculous obstacles that you never thought that you would ever incur. And for every yes, you get 20 no's, no matter whether that's when you're selling your product, when you're trying to recruit, when you're trying to fundraise. I think that's something that came from Y Combinator. We went through Y Combinator. It's filled with founder encouragement advice, and this is something that just going through the roller coaster, it's so important to have someone who you trust and are willing and able to trust when you're down as well as when you're up. Obviously, I don't have to mention even that obviously you need someone that is relentlessly resourceful. They're not only just resourceful at occasions, and they're not just relentless, so they'll just hack on. They will actually just continue to solve really important problems again and again and again and again, and you'll work together on doing that. But sort of relationship wise, I think that first thing is important. Throwing the ball.
Yeah, I also worked with my co-founders before. Glenn was actually my intern in 2014, and we've been working together ever since. He came to my last job with me as well. And then Caitlin and I, my Caitlin, not you, Caitlin, started working together 4 or 5 years ago on a bunch of stuff. And so we had a good base of trust. We also knew how each other worked. And then early on, it was also figuring out how we're going to divvy stuff up. Caitlin and Glenn are two of the most talented engineers I've ever met. And I'm I'm terrified when I see the code that's still in our product that I wrote. So early on, it was clear that a lot of what I could do uniquely was even just help create space to build once we know what we were going to do. So that's also the thing that I think is interesting when you start talking about bringing co-founders on. Co-founder composition is what do you each bring to the table? You can totally be successful with a team that's just engineers. It's really hard to be successful if you're a team that's just scrappy business-minded folks. And so it's finding the right composition of people can be tough. And if I'm in the advice giving business, I had no idea I was going to start a company. I had no idea I was going to start it with these people. The one piece of advice I could give is go work at places that you're going to work with really smart folks, because you don't know what you'll want to go do with those folks down the road. I called Caitlin out of the blue 2 years ago, being hey, are you liking what you're doing? And then now we're here. So that it's sort of a serendipity thing, but it's by fortune of having worked at some places where I worked with some really sharp people.
Yeah, so for me, it was, let's see. So my two co-founders, James and Paul, they actually knew each other from Facebook relatively early on. So James joined Facebook in 2006 and Paul joined in 2008. And then Airbnb started recruiting a lot of people from Facebook in 2014. Lots of the early data engineers, data infra people actually joined kind of as a group. And so James and Paul were both a part of that group. And so I I have the least long tenured relationship with them because we all met in 2014. And so, yeah, I think that I would just echo mutual trust and respect is probably the most important. It is the most important thing. Paul was always an engineer who I could rely on to build great tools and, things that worked. And James was a product manager who also I could always rely on to go to. And, I would ask him for a new feature and he would always build it. And, we would have thoughtful, fun conversations about that kind of stuff. And then separately, I just, I think I had this really great relationship with James, and James actually asked me to join the product team and report to him. And so I moved over to product and joined the infrastructure team, and he was my manager. And I think that it's really, really important to find people you have complementary skill sets with. So James is not that I am, not a great manager, but James is a really exceptional manager and a mentor to me. And I think that like a lot of what I learned about people management comes from him. And I think that he just spikes on a dimension that is, that is complementary to the dimensions that I think I spike on. And so I think that that's a really great combination. And then, yeah, I mean, in terms of how I found them, I had no expectation of either Paul or James deciding to join me on this journey. James was always a mentor to me. And so about a month after I really started exploring the idea, I reached out to him and asked him if he wanted to go on a walk and, maybe talk me off of like a crazy idea. And he ended up just saying, yeah, I'd be interested in doing this with you if you want to. And then Paul, who, I mean, the two of them had been working together now for like 14 years. I guess, just it's kind of mandatory that they work together at this point. I don't think they know any other options.
That must have been a fun walk that you went on.
Yeah, it was fun. It really, it was, it's really fun when a mentor and somebody who you really, really respect, chooses to kind of double down on the relationship.
Yeah, for us, I really just ended up working with two of my best friends on the company. One of them I knew from work. So Josh, I actually work with at Segment. We both worked on the same team, actually on the same features that kind of inspired High Touch from Segment. So we had a shared understanding from there. And Kashish, my other co-founder, was our roommate. So we all lived together and talked about ideas and different sort of ideas all the time, and had been friends and living together for a long time. And actually when I initially left Segment, Kashish and I were working on a different startup, and Josh left Segment to work on a different startup, and through some array of different pivots, we decided to all work together. I think the most important thing is just to really pick people that you're down to work with for 12, 14, whatever amount of hours per day, and just hang out with all the time, that you really respect from a skill set and more like ability to learn level. I think a lot of the problems that are faced in the early days, like definitely experience with the problem you're solving helps a lot. Definitely experience like building product and reasoning about businesses and stuff like that does help a lot. But in the early days, I don't think experience matters that much past those things. And it's really just about learning new things, because there's going to be tons of things thrown at your way. So personally, I think the most important thing in co-founders past this sort of like complementary skill set of seeing you can have people that are excited to work on the most basic level of things with starting a company, is just finding people that you're really excited to work with on the problem all day, and spend a ton of time with. So if you can, I think just working with your best friend, assuming they're also interested in building a business, is pretty ideal.
Yeah, I think, can I jump in with one addition here, Mel?
Yeah, go ahead.
Talk about working with your best friends. I think it's interesting to see. So if you look at cohorts of startups, recent startups, and sort of particularly, for example, if you look at YC companies, there's an interesting trend where there's more and more of like married couples or couples that are actually starting a company together. Okay, I can see Barry shaking his head. I would love to do that with my husband. And that's because he is my best friend. And I think the trend that's going on is because women are becoming more and more an integral part of the workplace. And so it's actually a realistic option for those two best friends to actually do something together. Obviously, I'm talking pretty heteronormative here. But just in that light of like a woman and a man traditionally not, having the opportunity to work together, I think that's an interesting trend. And then I wanted to just add on to what Nick was saying with, where they can spike your abilities in some areas. I really relate to that. And just echoing it with saying, like, work with someone that inspires you. That's really fantastic. Just my co-founder really inspires me all the time. And that inspires me to want to do better, and also sort of increases that respect aspect.
Great. Yeah, I think that sounds like great advice from all of you. So thank you for sharing. Let's talk more about the business side. You shared your vision and your initial idea for what you wanted your company to be. And I'm sure that's evolved over time as you got out into the market, you realized what customers are actually looking for. So what did that process look like for you? How do you take in feedback to change your product over time?
I'd say early on, it's super scary. Like, it was a very scary process to go out and tell people I liked and respected, like, hey, I'm starting a thing. B, like, here's the idea. I mentioned earlier, like, even when people were validating the idea, I kept kind of thinking it wasn't true. I think it took us, when we actually started building something and putting it in people's hands, that's like the ultimate feedback loop. And so one thing I wish we did was like just start building and prototyping. Like, if I give my old self some advice, like start building and prototyping earlier, and then take the mindset of like, we can throw this away. Like, when we started building, I think we were really like, okay, like this has to be the thing. And I think the right mentality is like build cheap prototypes and throw it away, which is common advice. I'm not like the first person on earth to say that, but it's like, I think in the moment it can feel this pressure, especially if you're thinking about like going and fundraising or applying for something like YC, of like, I've got to get the idea just right. It's okay to not be right away, and like just focus on getting something into someone's hand, and then take the mentality of like, it's okay if we throw this away. I found that difficult to fully inhabit in a way that like I feel like I learned a lot from now, and I would certainly do it. I've done that like a few months sooner in retrospect.
Oh my God. Oh, Nick, you just unmuted. Take it away.
No, okay, sure. I think that I think that there are kind of three things that come to mind. I think that the first one that's just really, really hard to balance when you are going out and proposing something new is this balance between pitching your idea and listening to what the customer is trying to tell you. And they're both so important because, like, I mean, not that I would recommend this, but if you ever go and read, literature on like how to be a salesperson, which being a founder is doing a lot of sales, there's like, generally the recommendation is to try to sound like an expert and talk around their problems, but what's going on and you kind of have the direction. And as a founder trying to figure out exactly what to build, you might have a vision, but you really need to listen to customers to help point you in the right direction. And so I think that it's really, really hard. And, early on, I would, as much as it like is hard to go into these conversations and just be very open to being wrong, I think it's incredibly important. And maybe over time, as your product gets more established and the vision is kind of more set in stone, then you can kind of try to move towards this direction of like, you are pitching the vision, you are pitching the future, versus, and like, if you go talk to investors or something else, like you have to be pitching and you have to be the expert. But when you talk to customers, like you really just have to listen to them. And so I think that kind of leads into the second point, which is that very early on, like you just have to be absolutely obsessed with the pain point that you're trying to solve, the like customers' feedback. Every little just tiny thing that they share with you is a gift. And it's like very, very important that you write it all down, that you aggregate it, that you reflect on it, that you bring it up and discuss it with the team. And it's really, really hard to do that well, because as a startup, you don't have the process, you don't have the tools in place. And so I think focusing really early on trying to get those things lined up. And then, I don't know, I mean, we have like a Slack channel called Paper Cuts, and it's just every tiny little thing that we see that's wrong with our product, we try to put into that channel and then act on in some way. And so I just generally, customer obsession is like very important, probably at every stage, but it's really important at this stage. And then the last thing is, I think that you really have to view your customers early on as partners. Like in the very early stages, the first 10 customers and probably beyond, it's not about value extraction. Like, you should probably be charging much less value than you're hoping to deliver in the long term. I think that there are like arguments for trying to, optimize pricing and do these kinds of things, but early on, like their feedback, them going out and saying that your tool solved a problem is worth so much more to you than any kind of like transactional nature of the relationship. So, yeah.
Great. I like that paper cuts. I think that's a good takeaway from just applying to anything, just writing down those little things that kind of irk you. Steph or Tejas, do you have any feedback on this one? And just a quick reminder to the audience as we are winding down on time, if you have any questions for the panelists, just to add them to the chat now, as we do have about 13 minutes left.
You can go first, Steph. I think you have something.
Oh, me? Yeah, sure, happy to. Yeah, I think those 3 sections that Nick reviewed, just fully aligned with everything that I would recommend. And I literally had written down very similar notes on this subject. And, particularly that first part about, and Barry was also touching on that in his first answer, it's difficult to really believe that you're onto something. And, you're like, no, I mean, I'm probably just doing it wrong or whatever. But I think it's really important to believe in your insight and try to understand where it's coming from. And then what we do at Avo, we build extremely close collaboration with our customers and have done that from the beginning. And I so relate to that third point as well of like seeing our customers as partners. I've made lifelong friends out of some of our early customers. It's just really valuable, and it's like they're friendships because you're often the first ever potential solution that you're solving a problem that they really didn't even know they could solve. It's one of those things potentially, and in our case, optimizing that planning, implementing, verifying analytics process, it's something that so many people got so frustrated by, but hadn't necessarily thought that, yeah, okay, there's a scalable way to solve it. And so it's a really beautiful relationship, and I recommend just cherishing it. And I totally relate to the paper cuts channel as well. We also have a more positive one. Like we have a similar exact channel where we're like highlighting like, hey, this happened. And we even structure our cycles, product development cycles based on this. So we work in 3-week cycles, where the first 2 weeks are sort of focused around roadmap things, big vision things and strategic things. And then we have 1 week cool downs, where we work on things that went into our cool down inbox, which is just an Asana project that we pile up during those 2 weeks to, number one, maintain that overview of the paper cuts that our customers or potentially prospects are experiencing, and then also to help sort of facilitate the ability to keep focus for 2 weeks as well on the big picture things. And yeah, that balance of working on your differentiators versus listening and responding rapidly to your customer feedback is a difficult one to strike. and it's probably going to be an endless learning. And I think that's like one of the fundamental things of being a product manager in general. And it's extremely difficult when you're just like an early stage startup and trying to find product market fit. But basically, this is all about finding product market fit. And I'm reading a book right now called the 4 Steps to the Epiphany, which is a book from 2005, which sort of talked a little bit about how customer discovery is the most fundamental piece of early stage startup experience. It's not only about building the product, it's also about finding the market for the product and then tweaking both of those continually until you have product market fit.
Yeah, I think
Thanks, Steph.
I think from our end and our story, I think the biggest thing was really just to focus on listening to our customers and customers that we're doing discovery with as the guide rather than our own vision for the product. I think vision is like really great, obviously, as an entrepreneur, but really I see that as a guide towards what to do discovery with our customers. And ultimately what we build is driven by what our customers need and what demand we can capture from that right away, assuming we feel like we're working in a sufficiently large market. As an example, like when we started working on Hightouch, we were really looking to build a much more extravagant platform on top of the data warehouse to manage customer data, something more along the lines of a CDP. But we realized that a lot of our early customers could get by with just a very simple pipe between a SQL query and a bunch of different SaaS tools. So we decided to narrow down the scope of our product to just focus on that so we could acquire as many customers as possible. And now we're starting to add on more higher level interfaces to do some of these operations. For example, an interface that looks similar to the audience builder of products like segment personas and things like that as additional value for some of our customers. But really our vision was to start building something much more massive in scope. And we still see a lot of potential there, but ultimately like the customers we were able to find and the demand we were able to capture was asking us to do something much simpler to start. And as a result, I think it's just really important to follow ultimately like what demand you're able to capture and what your customers that you're able to line up actually want rather than the vision you have as an entrepreneur. I think a lot of early stage startups actually just don't make it to the second stage where they're able to actually pursue their wider vision because they're unable to queue up enough customers and stay focused in the earliest stage. I think that's more important than the fear of chasing something too small, which a lot of people get stuck up in.
Yeah, like
maybe
that.
one thing
That's great
to
advice. Go ahead.
Yeah, can I add one thing sort of to highlight? I think I think all of these answers reflect the balance of listening to your customers and having the vision. And another aspect of that, which is related but slightly nuanced, is the balance. Like it's difficult to strike the balance of being opinionated and giving advice for how your customers should be doing things versus sort of learning from them on what they're currently doing and how can you help them doing that better. And one of the things that I relate heavily in one of the things that Barry mentioned also in his answer with like, do they really have this problem? You so much want to understand what they are going through, but ultimately so many of your customers, and you learn that as you have more and more customers, they want your advice. And it's difficult to accept. It was difficult to accept for me that to them, I'm the expert. I'm like, but I want to learn what you're doing. And then I want to do help you do what you want to do. But ultimately, they often are also looking for advice. And that's another difficult balance to strike, similar to that sort of vision versus listening.
For sure. We do have 6 minutes left. And I do want to just end with, Barry touched on this already, but if you could go back in time and give yourself some advice in your very early days of starting your business, what would it be?
I would echo what Barry said before. Just, nothing is sacred, especially process. Change it. We've kind of embraced this concept of Kaizen, which is Toyota Manufacturing's like idea of just continuous improvement. Tiniest little thing is out of place, put it in place, make it better. Things in the long term get much better if you're willing to kind of look at something and say, that's not right, let me try and make it a little bit better. And also, there's like this massive pendulum swing of early on, I felt like I had to do everything. And now I've realized that like recruiting is like by far the most important thing, and building team and culture and like values, and like those things are just infinitely more important in the long term. And I don't think that I realized how quickly that would happen.
Yeah, I think what I would want to give myself as advice would be to really be willing and be more willing to believe in my insight. I think it took me a long time. Again, I think it's really important to do customer discovery, and you really have to do it. But and Nick, you touched on this a little bit. You did some consulting. I think we also, I did that a lot. I did that a lot as well, personally. And as a part of that, I think I took that unnecessarily far in sort of being a consultant, and potentially, for example, one of our earliest clients, we made up, in my opinion, too big of a professional services agreement with them instead of focusing on the product. And that was, I think, a part of the reasons behind that. It was sort of, I would have liked to be earlier in convincing myself really fully that, you know, my insights were valid. Obviously, you need to continue to validate it, and you continuously are updating your strategy and adapting to the market and things like that. But believing in your insights while listening to the market would be my advice.
Agree with that one also.
Barry, if you have any other advice that you'd give yourself, feel free to jump in.
I jumped ahead. I think the other thing is just chill out a little bit. Like, it's pretty. I think you're a founder, right? Like, you like got this idea and you're excited, and especially when you go and like recruit co-founders and like raise money, everything just like ratchets up, like intensity wise, and like that's just gonna keep going. And I think early on, especially, like just try to have some fun, learn. Don't feel like you have to get everything right away. It's cool. Like if you have the right idea and you're in the right market too, like it's not like every day matters to some extent, but like I think sometimes if you walk in with the mentality of like, oh shit, or whatever I can say, we got to figure this out right away, and like, oh, the stuff, you can like put yourself in this corner. And I think we found ourselves there pretty early on. Yeah, so just chill out a little bit. I think like a lot of the infrastructure around startups is like designed to make it all feel really intense. And it will be, but early on, try to have some fun. That's what I would have told myself.
Yeah, great. I totally echo it. I was giving a talk recently on and I decided to do like a founder pep talk, but after it, some folks said it wasn't necessarily a pep talk, how I framed it. Number one, be relentlessly resourceful. Number two, it never gets easier, you just go faster. This is one of my favorite quotes. I think Patrick Collison said it, and he was referring to, at a fireside chat where I was with him, he was referring to a biker. Like it never gets easier, you just go faster, and that's how it feels. And then number three, totally agree with you, Barry. Like, remember to enjoy the ride. And I have that as a personal mantra. Sometimes when I get a little bit overwhelmed, I'm like, I have a really good and strong cue for myself. Like, hey, remember to enjoy, because if this feels hard, it means you're growing.
Good advice. Tejas, do you want to close this out? Do you have any advice for yourself in the final minutes?
Yeah, I think the biggest one I can think of, I mean, I think a lot of it's already been said, but one thing to add is I feel like it's not actually that. I think one thing I realize is before you have customers, it doesn't make sense to work a ton of hours. I think a lot of the time I spent in the customer discovery phase was like a lot of the value was received whenever we got new inputs the next day or the next week from customers, and actually like new realizations, and just sitting around spending a lot of time just like thinking about the same information or building was just like honestly not that helpful. It's much better to preserve that energy for when you actually do have customers, and when each additional hour you can put in actually does have additional ROI for your business, which I feel like is a stage you're at a growth stage company, and there's a variety of different ways to balance that. But then it's actually much more valuable to be stressed and to be working a ton from the perspective I see it. Whereas before product market fit, before you actually have a lot of customers, it's actually not that, it's not as useful, I think, to overly stress about something. Sometimes you just need to wait on additional inputs and just take a much more calm approach, which is probably always better. But that's one thing I think I would emphasize if I were to do it again. I would just really take my time on that initial state. I mean, obviously be very mindful of what I'm working on, make sure I'm trying to find the quickest path to do things, but not overly stressed, and try to just spend a ton of time thinking about the same thing. I would actually just wait sometimes to get more inputs, because I think that's actually what made like step function difference changes for our business in that stage.
Great. All right. Awesome advice. Thank you guys so much. We are at time, but I really appreciate you all sharing your stories and your experiences. And thanks to our audience members for calling in. I hope you guys got something out of this discussion. And have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thanks so much. This was a lot of fun.
Yep.
Thank you. And thanks for hosting, Mel.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks,
no
Mel.
problem. Thanks, guys. Bye.